Bob and Bing were not the beginning of films in Bali. You know, there's quite a few. You can see some of the really old black and white films from the 1930s either on YouTube or up at the Rendezvous Cafe in Ubud. But we have a guest now, my dear friend Richard Flax, who's going to tell us about his experience in the 1970s, Richard?
Making films here in the 1970s, yeah, the late 70s, that's when we made the first film.
Oh my God, so when did you get to Bali?
I came to Bali from Sydney, where I had been in the ensemble theatre where I learnt my skills.
Oh, you're a thespian, darling.
Well, yeah, I kind of spent a lot of time behind the camera, setting lights, sound, stage, and everything else. And when dragged up onto the stage, I did my best. But I did realise that I was better at making things from behind the camera. So that was an area which I tended to follow once I got here.
All right, but you don't sound Australian. You're not
I'm
Australian.
not.
No, but you were in Sydney.
I escaped from London.
Oh, okay.
I used to work in Christie's. I'm ex-Christie's. I'm a qualified antique pre-Christian jewellery evaluator, which is about as much good as, you know, knowing how to clip elephants' toenails here. But it was...
It worked out at the park.
Yeah, you know, it was a fascinating field, and I very, very specialised. But that's kind of boring.
Oh, okay.
It leads to nothing other than a corporation and a heart attack. So I got out of there as quickly as I could.
So you found
Went
Bali.
to Sydney. Yep, went to Sydney, was with Hayes Gordon, who, as you know, is, you know Hayes.
A theatrical producer.
Yeah, and one of Australia's biggest actors. He was Stanislavski based, and the ensemble theatre is Theatre in the Round in North Sydney. It's still there today. It's still teaching students. It's a brilliant institution. And Hayes literally knocked us down, dragged us out, pulled out our stuffing and put it back in a way that made us lose our predilections and become some good to somebody in the industry. So I spent a long time in the theatre.
Acting class and therapy, they're very close together, you know.
Difficult to tell the difference sometimes.
Sometimes. So film, that's not necessarily an easy leap for people to go from theatre to film. So how did that happen?
Well, it also happened in Sydney, because there were a lot of young filmmakers in Sydney in those days who had $55 and a camera, and they used to run around. And a lot of us would go and make short and very interesting movies. If they could be dug up these days, they would be quite interesting. Okay. Some of them quite horrific. I still remember the bits of steak for eyes that had been put out and things like that. So I actually transitioned at that point from theatre to actually falling in love with camera and with sound.
So when you first came to Bali, you had it in your mind that you could do film here?
Hardly.
Oh, okay.
When we first came to Bali, we didn't have any electricity.
Oh, that's right.
We had no telephones.
Yep.
We had well, there were two phones on the island, but you know, that's another story. So when one first came to Bali, one came here. I came here intending to spend 6 weeks here. I got here, and the first day as I went into Denpasar, a neon light came up on my head which said, "You're going to stay here."
I haven't heard that story. How funny.
Yeah, it just did.
Yeah.
And I realized that I had finally found an environment which suited me and my particular unusual relationship to the planet, which I'm not going to get into now. Okay?
Fair enough, because there's a long story there. I want to know about your films.
Well, okay. Films. A friend of mine came to Bali. He'd set up a film for the BBC, for the World About Us series, which in those days was a really top quality series which showed people a lot of the planet. And a very unusual set of circumstances, he ended up without someone to run the Nagra, which is the sound recorder in those days, and to co-produce it. Quite literally, the guy who came along couldn't do it. So Bill was in a flat panic. He heard about me because people knew I had been in the industry here. And he came and sat with me one day and said, "Please."
Oh, right.
So we got on like a house on fire. We shot the first Balinese Surfer film, which we did, you wouldn't believe this, but it was done just with Bill and I. He was camera, I was sound. We set up all of the helicopter shots. We produced and did the whole thing. We had a few of the local kids with us who were helping us, but you know, talk about a very lean crew. It was easy. You can imagine the pair of us running through the fields, carrying tripods and in full sarong so that we could get in front of the procession as they came down the hill and film the ducks jumping into the water. It was that kind of thing.
So you took filmmaker quite literally.
Oh yeah. It was made on the hoof. But I must say, and I say this with due deference to Bill because he was the producer And my credit was, I don't know what happened, my credit didn't quite come up, but it was just the two of us. It did come up, but not as it was.
Well, Richard, we're going to take...
Didn't worry me.
That's very nice of you now at this point. But you've brought a copy of this first film you worked on.
Both of them.
For us to see. Oh, for both. All right. Well, we're going to take a little break now. Richard, thank you very much. I have to book you to come back. This is so frustrating, but you must come back and tell us more stories. But right now, we want to show a little bit of a film made in Bali in 1977. 77.
For the BBC.
Ooh. Don't go away.
With 30,000 tourists a month, Bali could change faster than any other place in the world. But most things are very much the same as they always have been. The boys may now be surfing, but they're still performing the old dances, like the Barong trance dance. And even when it's in front of the tourists, the trance and the knives are real. The Balinese have never liked traveling, and 5 years ago, these kids would never have left their own village. But already they're dreaming of waves, and in search of the best, they'll get together any sort of transport and follow the experienced foreigners across the island. Today, the big waves are breaking 25 miles away off the cliffs of Uluwatu.
Okay, let's have a fight.
A major factor in surfing is the wind. It has to blow off the land to lift and give good shape to the waves. On an island, if it's blowing onshore on one side, it has to be blowing offshore on the other. So now the boys are following the wind and seeing parts of Bali they would never have seen before. The people of Uluwatu find this new interest in their coast rather strange. This remote peninsula has always been a very sacred place. The few people who live here respect and fear the waters off their cliffs. It was only discovered to be a surfing paradise in 1972, and until then, no one would have dreamed of going out to the big waves over the reef. Just to reach the cliff top, there's a 2-mile walk. To the locals, Uluwatu is a dangerous and mysterious place. But to the surfing world, these are some of the finest waves anywhere.
You're on board, man.
Hey, Shinbad, watch out. I know, baby. Let's get on, man.
Man, you have to cry, man.
No, man. Ada pun. Ada.
Good work.
Mana ombaknya? Kawan gedean nih, cabang nih kawan. Cabang gedeannya.
For foreigners, getting here means a trip of 1,000 miles and a struggle down the cliff. For the Balinese, it's been a journey out of 1,000 years of belief. For the 2 million people on the island, the sea around them still remains the home of demons and evil spirits.